Hey there, hope everybody enjoyed their 4th of July. We have sleepers, breakouts, and busts for the second half of the season up next on a Kokomo Friday.
Alcantara, Soroka, you look so good in Boca. Peralta, Manoa, bounce back for Aaron Giolito, Castillo, Yoshida, Mosuzuka.
Happy Kokomo Friday and welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on July 5th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. We recorded this a few days in advance, so it will not be your normal Thursday recap. Instead, today on the show, sleepers, breakouts, and busts for the second half of the season, our latest prospect spotlight, and some of your mailbag questions. But let's jump right in. A sleeper heading into the second half, and Scott, you are up first.
Wow, really are jumping right in here. Okay. So my top sleeper pick for the second half it's going to be Clayton Kershaw, who I feel like is one of the most truly slept on. Is truly being slept on, the impact he could have here in the second half as he is rehabilitating from a shoulder injury. Which has been kind of the norm for Clayton Kershaw over the past several years. He always has some kind of ache going on with his shoulder and misses a stretch of the season. It just turned out it was the front end of the season this year. He did kind of have to slow his rehabilitation for about a week, but he's back to throwing again. It seems like he's still on track to return early in the second half, and the impact he could make on the Dodgers. I mean, just look at his track record. It's like I said, we've gotten used to this. We've gotten used to Clayton Kershaw coming back from shoulder stuff, even with diminished velocity, and it's hardly impacted the way he performed. There was a stretch last year where he was throwing high 80s on average, and he was still putting up fantastic ratios because he's Clayton Kershaw. Nothing seems to faze him. In all last year, he had a 2.46 ERA, a 106 whip, more than a strikeout per inning. He won 13 games and 24 starts because that's what happens when you pitch for the Dodgers. And I think by the time he's activated and gets a couple starts under his belt, we're just going to think of him as a fixture in fantasy lineups. Yeah, nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about the impact Clayton Kershaw could have down the stretch. I could see him being a total league winner based on what he does for you in the second half. And of course, I could put a number of injured starting pitchers, like long-term injured starting pitchers in this category. Jeffrey Springs should be returning at about the same time. Jacob deGrom maybe a little bit later.
Robbie Ray.
We've kind of just buried these guys because their return seems so far off that it was hard to imagine it coming to be. We're on the verge of it now. Mm-hmm. And if any of them are available in your leagues, Clayton Kershaw, I think priority number one, it's time to add him.
Yeah, Clayton Kershaw, 67% rostered on CBS. So could be out there in some shallower leagues. You could just go pick him up off the waiver wire and you could stash him for now. You mentioned a few other names. Chris, I know in the background there you said Robbie Ray, who has had his ups and downs throughout his career, but he's looked good on his rehab assignment. He's going to be pitching in a great ballpark in San Francisco. So I would throw Robbie Ray in that mix as well. Chris, let's slide over to you. A sleeper for the second half.
I just want to say, maybe I'm part of the problem because I'm having a hard time getting too excited about Clayton Kershaw coming back from a significant shoulder surgery at 36 years old. I don't want to doubt him because doubting Clayton Kershaw over the past half decade or so has not really worked out for people. And a lot of people have doubted him. He's, an all-time great. Those guys don't age the same as everyone else, but it does feel like it might be too much to come back from this season, although I hope I am wrong, and I do have him stashed in a couple places.
You say he's an all-time great, and this is just something I happened to discover the other day when I was looking up baseball stats with my kids. Did you know Clayton Kershaw is the Dodgers franchise leader in WAR, at least Baseball Reference version of WAR? That floored me. I mean, historic organization like the Dodgers,
Yeah.
that all-time leader, that
I mean,
I thought that was pretty amazing.
You're talking about a
Especially
guy
given how much time he's missed with injuries.
like the playoff stuff is what it is, but like in terms of peak, his peak is comparable to what Sandy Koufax did, and also he's entering his 17th season, something that Clayton or Sandy Koufax never even got close to. So, yeah, that makes sense. And
another fascinating observation along those lines: Brett Gardner, I believe, is top 20 in Yankees franchise history.
That feels wrong. That actually is not. Even if it's true, it's not. You know. I mean, I'll just throw my favorite Clayton Kershaw stat. He lowered his ERA every season of his career until 2018, which is just fascinating. The first 10 years of his career, he lowered his ERA after every season.
And that was probably the aberration, right?
Well, yeah, the 2.73 ERA he posted in 2018 raised his career ERA.
He had one year with like a mid-threes ERA, and we're like, oh, the decline is happening. And then it was right back to mid-twos after that.
Yeah, he's pretty good. My sleeper, Shane Baz, does he count? He's kind of in the same boat. He's not actually an injury stash anymore because they activated him from the IL.
If you think people are sleeping on his potential, it counts.
I mean, we're talking about a guy who, you know, when last we saw him healthy, he was the best pitching prospect in baseball. He has been, you know, the overall numbers on his minor league rehab assignment have not been overwhelmingly dominant, but that's mostly he was a little shaky early on. The last 5 outings, he has allowed 4 runs total with strikeout totals of 10, 8, 6, 7. The 6th strikeout effort came in 3 innings. And the fact that the Rays just traded Aaron Savali seems to open up a rotation spot for Shane Baz moving forward, which was the question that we had. Now he has not proven himself at the major league level. He has only topped 90 pitches once on his rehab assignment. So I think there are going to be some frustrations, as is the case generally with everybody on the Rays in fantasy. But Shane Baz is someone who has legitimate ace upside. By all the stuff metrics, he has been by far the best pitcher remaining at AAA. There is significant impact upside with Shane Baz, and he is someone that, you know, even before it looked like he had the clear path back to the rotation that he has now, I thought should have been rostered pretty much everywhere. But now that it looks like he's going to be in the rotation moving forward, I think Shane Baz is someone who absolutely needs to be rostered in every format. I think when you look at like Taj Bradley, someone we've gotten really excited about, who has proven himself more at the major league level over the past month or so than Shane Baz had before. I think I'd rather have Bradley, but it's real close, right?
Yeah, it's actually a mailbag question that I had for later on. Someone asked that exact question. Would you rather have Taj Bradley or Shane Baz? Which way would you go, Scott?
I mean, right now you got to say Bradley.
Yeah, the guy getting 9
He's actually doing what you're hoping Baz will do, and maybe Taj Bradley will fall off a bit, but you don't want to bank on a largely unproven pitcher like Baz.
Can I give one more lower end name?
Yes.
Spencer Schwellenbach, who we've talked a little bit about. I think there's quite a bit to like in Spencer Schwellenbach's approach. He has a full 5-pitch arsenal, including a splitter that looks like it might be a legit wipeout pitch, 49% whiff rate. He's also got the curveball at 32%. Slider and cutter have been a little underwhelming in terms of whiffs, but the results have been decent. But all in all, you know, he's got a 5.68 ERA. That's pretty ugly, but he's doing a really good job of limiting hard contact. He's got good control. I think there's potential for more strikeouts moving forward. He's got a 3.90x ERA through his first, 5 starts. And I think there is room for him to build on that with, you know, what we think will be a very good Braves lineup backing him up. So Spencer Schwellenbach is someone that for the second half of the season, I think could be a very, very useful fantasy option.
Can I give my bonus sleeper now? We're doing that. We're already getting
no, only me. Actually, yesterday was my birthday. I don't know if you know. So sorry.
Happy birthday. When you say yesterday, do you mean as
when we're recording this, it's tomorrow, but when they're listening to this, it's yesterday.
The timing of this podcast is so weird right now.
Yeah, Kokomo Friday on a Wednesday afternoon is a little weird.
It is kind of a Friday though. especially since we all have Friday off normally, right?
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, my bonus one is Mark Vientos, who we've talked about. I was trying to avoid picking a bunch of players that we've talked about a lot on the podcast, and we've talked about Vientos a lot recently because he claimed the third base job for the Mets. He's been hot lately. But I think sometimes in the day-to-day grind of giving 1,000 reaction to 1,000 different players, sometimes the extent of enthusiasm can be lost. I'm very enthusiastic about Mark Vientos, given that he's always had considerable power. 2022 and 2023, he played a combined 162 games in the minors and hit 40 home runs. His max exit velocity in the majors this year is it's 89th percentile. So he is
higher last year.
It was even higher last year. He's capable of hitting the ball in the 110s, the 100 teens, however you want to put that. And he's gotten the strikeout rate down to 23% in the majors after being more around 30%. It's obviously a smaller sample, and we could see that strikeout rate climb again with increased exposure. But honestly, the way he impacts the ball, I think he could potentially be fine even with a 30% strikeout rate. So anything around 25, and like I said, it's south of 25 now, I think is very encouraging for Mark Vientos. I could see him having an impact for the Mets like Jake Berger had for the Marlins in the second half last year that led to so much enthusiasm for him in fantasy coming into this year. Granted, it didn't pan out for Berger in the long run, but we're just talking about 3 months of impact here. And I think Vientos is going to be a premier slugger in the second half and maybe even emerge as a must-start fantasy player.
Mark Vientos, 67% rostered on CBS. So again, could be out there in some shallower leagues. The one thing I do want to see him improve on is the launch angle. He's hit a lot of ground balls, but everything else, hitting the ball hard, making more contact, he's still been able to tap into that power, even though he has been hitting too many ground balls. So if he can raise that launch angle, I think we could see even more power coming from Mark Vientos in the second half. Two names for me, sleepers. TJ Friedl, 61% rostered on CBS. He's currently on the IL with a hamstring injury. Should be ready to go after the All-Star break. He's only played 26 games. He has produced 4 homers and 6 steals during that span. A lower batting average, 216, but the BABIP is really low. His expected batting average is right around 250. So if you can get a 250 batting average with a 15 to 20 homer, 30 steal pace in the second half of the season while either hitting first or second in the Reds lineup, I think that's going to be a really valuable player. So TJ Friedl, I think someone you can get on the cheap. And a pitcher, Max Meyer. We saw him dominate earlier this season, a 2.12 ERA, a .82 whip, 14% swinging strike rate, very small sample size, only 3 starts. The minor league numbers are underwhelming, but there have been reports that the Marlins specifically wanted Max Meyer to work on certain pitches. So that's kind of why some of the numbers look wonky down there. We've heard for weeks, maybe months now, that he's going to return to the Marlins rotation at some point. And just given his prospect pedigree, as great as that slider is, I could just see him having a big impact, at least in terms of ratios and strikeouts. The wins are probably going to be hard to come by, but both of these guys are also widely available. So if you want to just pick them up as free agents, I think TJ Friedl and Max Meyer are fine options.
I actually wrote about this in the prospects report this week, where Max Meyer's latest start at AA, it was his longest and it was his best since getting sent down. And in it, he went back to throwing his slider 48% of the time, which was about how often he was throwing it during that 3-start stint in the majors where he was so impressive. I think it marked the transition from the transition out of development mode for Max Meyer back into competitive mode in anticipation of him returning to the majors. I think that obviously the Marlins haven't really signaled that verbally, but I think if we're looking for signs that they're getting him ready to return, I thought that was a pretty big one.
How would you guys rank the 4 sleeper pitchers we threw out there for the second half? Shane Baz, Schwellenbach, Kershaw, and Max Meyer.
Baz, Kershaw. I'm going to give Meyer the edge over Schwellenbach, but I do like Schwellenbach too. It's just it's a little more playing a hunch than than feeling like he just needs the opportunity.
Yeah. I might flop Schwellenbach and Meyer, but I do think, at least for me, there's a clear gap between Baz and the rest of them now that it looks like there's a clear path for him to be in the rotation moving forward. And honestly, there might just be a talent gap between Shane Baz and the other guys. He's coming back from Tommy John surgery. He's unproven at the highest level, but at this point in all of their careers, I think there's a decent chance Shane Baz is just the most talented of that group.
If you're telling me they're coming back the same day, I would take Kershaw over Baz. The reason I put Baz ahead of Kershaw was
there might be a month gap
Yeah.
between them.
Gonna throw some just deep league darts out there, and you let me know if you could see any of these players making an impact. Again, some pretty deep league names here, but Parker Meadows is someone we mentioned recently. Chris, I know you brought him up, and the AAA numbers have looked awesome. I feel like the Tigers can certainly use some help in terms of their hitting and their lineup. Davison De Los Santos of the D-backs, he is having a breakout season in the minors as a 21-year-old, 344 batting average, 26 homers, 1071 OPS. Eugenio Suarez has been a mess at third base. De Los Santos not regarded as a good defender, so I don't know if they're going to trust him. Cade Cavalli, a former top pitching prospect with the Nationals, he's rehabbing his way back from Tommy John surgery, some big strikeout numbers in the minors. And speaking of strikeouts, Chase McDermott, Orioles pitching prospect, currently leads AAA in strikeouts. My guess is they'll probably go out and make a trade, and maybe he won't matter. But can you see any of these names mattering in deeper leagues? Parker Meadows, De Los Santos, Cavalli, Chase McDermott.
I don't think any of them need to be rostered right now. I don't think this is a stash situation like we talked about with Meyer and Kershaw. But, Meadows, I think at this point has very little to prove at AAA. So it just comes down to when the Tigers think him and, Spencer Torkelson, I think should come up around the same time and just see what they have, because at some point they've got to, figure out what these pieces can be as they move into the next phase of their development. So Meadows, I think, is the most likely to get a chance relatively soon. And I don't think he's the most talented of this group, but the numbers he put up at AAA are impressive enough that, when he gets the call, he's going to be someone we're talking about.
I don't know who is the most talented of this group. I don't think Parker Meadows is going to be a big deal in the long run. I'm not saying you can't take a shot on him in a deep league, because there are only so many quality outfielders in a 15-team roto league, for instance. But I have seen a certain amount of salivating out there over Davison De Los Santos because of the numbers he's putting up at AAA. I think it's a big fake out. I'm not saying the guy can't hit the ball hard, but it is an extremely hitter-friendly environment, and his chase numbers are really bad. I think major league pitchers are going to eat him alive.
And even Double-A, he was playing in the Texas League. That's a pretty hitter-friendly environment too, right?
At Double-A, you're saying?
Yeah, the Texas League.
Yeah, I don't know how long he was down there.
Only he's spent about half his season between Double-A and Triple-A this year.
Okay, yeah, they're both especially the Diamondbacks Double-A and Triple-A affiliates, both extremely hitter friendly. But beyond that, I just think the caliber. I think he's going to be. I think he's the sort of hitter, Davison De Los Santos, who will be exposed against higher end pitching. Looking at some of those chase rates, the Guardians picked him in the Rule 5 draft and didn't keep him. They returned him to the Diamondbacks. And
it's weird.
Yeah, so they obviously were not thrilled with what they saw. Yeah, I'm not saying he can't have any role in the second half in fantasy, but I don't think it's going to come anywhere close to delivering the kinds of numbers he's putting up.
Yeah, the Rule 5 stuff is definitely weird with De Los Santos. It's just the age to production. It's pretty impressive what he's doing as a 21-year-old. You mentioned, obviously, the environments that he's playing in, but we'll see if De Los Santos can get a shot with the D-backs in the second half. Speaking of prospects, it's Friday. Let's get into another prospect spotlight. It's time to discuss some of the prospects who are catching our eye from a fantasy perspective, thanks to our sponsors at Hyundai, where they're thinking about every step of your journey out on the road. Let's talk about A's prospect Jacob Wilson, 22 years old, first-round pick in last year's draft. He was selected 6th overall. And say it with me, guys. Jacob Wilson, son of former major leaguer Jack Wilson. You know I love those second-generation
Did you
players.
Did you want us to say it with you? Because I wasn't exactly sure how we were going to say it.
Yeah, it would have been a complete mess, but
Yeah.
We should have tried.
I
It was a
wanted
lot of
you
words
an opportunity
you wanted
there.
us to say together.
I wanted you guys to think it with me, or at least
I thought it.
get ready for it. Right. Well, that's what we're talking
10 syllables is a bit too much
It
to
is a
be
lot,
trying
yeah.
to say. Like,
Yeah.
son of former major leaguer Jack Wilson. Like, doesn't really work. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, you know?
Jacob Wilson, by the way, he has played 39 games in the minors this season. He is batting .464 with 5 homers, 22 doubles, a 12.06 OPS. He recently got called up to AAA, where he has continued to rake. And no offense to Max Schumann, but the A's have a pretty clear opening at shortstop if they want to promote Wilson to the majors. Scott, is that something you could see them doing?
I mean, I assume so with the numbers he's putting up. He's batting about 100 points higher than any other major leaguer outside of rookie ball. And it seems minor leaguer. Sorry. Thank you. It's the sort of stat that seems mathematically, like the math of baseball doesn't allow it to happen. And I don't think it will allow it to happen in the long run, but when you're this much of an outlier for this long, because Jacob Wilson has been doing this. It started at AA, at AAA. He's continued to bat over 400. Then he missed about 3 weeks with a month with knee tendonitis. He's come back. He's batting over 500 since he's returned. It's not like he's just gotten really hot and then and we're just waiting for the momentum to cool off. I think he's showing us that he just has an exceptional hit tool. And this is a guy I wrote off coming into the season because there reports of his, he was lacking power. You kind of need power in the modern game. And the scouting reports didn't give him much of a chance of that. The exit velocity readings aren't impressive. He's sort of like Brooks Lee in that way. But he does have an ISO because of so many doubles. He has an ISO of 242. And he actually hasn't been horrible in terms of home run output, 5 and 153 at bats at the time of this recording. So I don't think he's totally punchless. He doesn't strike out much at all. Obviously, he hits a ton of line drives. He's capable of hitting the ball the other way. All the ways that you would expect a player to have a high batting average, Jacob Wilson is doing that. It's always difficult to project a unicorn outcome for a player because this is not a profile we see much of in the majors, certainly not in the modern game. But I think if you are going to predict to project a Luis Arraez outcome on any prospect, Jacob Wilson is the one to do it with, and it may be selling him short a little in terms of upside. I don't know. He's a weird one. He wasn't in my top 100 prospects to begin the season, but he certainly would be now.
Mm-hmm.
Can I be the pessimist?
Yeah, you can crap all over
it. It's
easier to crap on it than to see it with open eyes.
It's a type of prospect that I think we'll see fairly regularly put up really good numbers in the minors and then just get the bat knocked out of their hands when they get up. I think the primary comp there would be Nick Madrigal, who, if you remember, between AA and AAA ran a 5.1% strikeout rate, was hitting, not 450, but like 350. And he's just been a complete non-factor at the major league level. And I think the key distinction, but that holds a Luis Arraez comp, I think out of the realistic realm of possibility is just that while Luis Arraez does not hit for power, he does hit the ball in the air quite a bit. He has a 12.2 degree average launch angle, and he has an extremely tight spray of his launches. That it's not just that he's not hitting infield fly balls. He's not hitting outfield fly balls. He's just hitting soft line drives. And that's how Luis Arraez has made himself into such a batting average standout, in addition to the 6% strikeout rate. Jacob Wilson's average launch angle so far at AAA is 6 degrees. So that is significantly lower. It's a lot more ground ball heavy. He has I just looked it up. It's like a 485 WOBA on 453 WOBA on ground balls alone. That's not going to happen at the major league level. I don't think peak Juan Pierre was doing that. So, Jacob Wilson is not an elite athlete. He's not super fast. I think he probably, like, he could be a regular at the major league level. His dad, Jack Wilson, made an all-star game. He had a couple seasons where he hit like 300. I could see that kind of outcome here, but I think it's, for fantasy, a pretty boring profile, because he doesn't steal at all either. I think he only has 2 steals this season, so that makes it tougher as well.
Yeah, I could see him making an impact in a head-to-head points league just because he doesn't strike out. He can hit lots of doubles, maybe in like a Brendan Donovan kind of way, which I know doesn't sound very exciting, but Donovan's a useful head-to-head points league.
He's 90% rostered right now, right?
Yeah, so I could see some kind of impact like that coming for someone like Jacob Wilson. He was one of Scott's 5 prospects on The Verge in his latest prospect report, so make sure to check that out, which is live on the site, cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball. Thanks again to Hyundai for sponsoring this segment and the show. Learn more at HyundaiUSA.com. Quick reminder to download and follow our 5-minute podcast, FBT and 5, wherever you listen to podcasts. We have a bonus prospect episode coming out every Saturday of the season. Let's take our first break, and when we return, second half breakouts right after this. Welcome back in. Let's talk second half breakouts. And Chris, we will start with you. I know you have a few stipulations here with your breakouts, so you can go ahead and list off all of them if you want.
Yeah, like I always struggle with the breakout, because it's like, is it, just something, someone's going to do something he's never done it before? Well, then a bunch of my options are not going to count, because, like, I feel pretty confident Julio Rodriguez is going to be much better in the second half than he was in the first. I'm pretty confident that whenever he's healthy, Fernando Tatis is going to be much better in the second half than he was in the first half. I think when Blake Snell comes back, there is going to be a stretch where Blake Snell is absolutely a dominant must-start fantasy pitcher. And so if all of those count, then I will say all of those guys. If those guys don't count and you're looking for something more, he's never done it before, I would probably go with Christopher Morel, who I've been pretty skeptical about in a lot of ways over the course of his career. He's gotten a lot of hype for fantasy.
I asked you beforehand, did you say Christopher Morel to me?
No. So Scott, make the case for Christopher Morel.
No, go ahead. I got somebody else I can talk about.
Scott has 8 names written down on a piece of paper somewhere.
Well, yeah, I started going through them. I was like, fine, I'll pick one who's not a superstar first round caliber player in the past. So yeah, Christopher Morel, look, I've been pretty skeptical of him. I think his approach is the reason that inconsistency has been a problem for him. I think it's a big part of why he has struggled to live up to expectations. And I do think there still is, like, legitimate, he is no longer an everyday player floor for Christopher Morel, because his defense is so bad. And frankly, his base running is actually pretty bad as well. And his bat's been pretty bad this season. So, like, he has to turn it around. But I do think there's still clearly an incredibly talented player there at the skill set. For whatever issues it has, he had played to his expected stats prior to this season. His expected stats are significantly better than they had been in the past. And all of a sudden, he's the second biggest underperformer in terms of expected WOBA minus WOBA this season. So I think there's a wide range of possible outcomes with his skill set, but Christopher Morel is absolutely someone that I think very well could become a must-start fantasy option at some point.
Yeah, I mean, you basically shared everything I was going to share. I will just add the actual numbers to put it in perspective. So he's actually Morel is hitting 195 with a 370 slug, which sound awful. He's been pretty productive in fantasy considering he's batting 195 with a 370 slug, but obviously those aren't good numbers. His expected batting average is 251. His expected slug is 472, which are obviously much better numbers. And I've been expecting all along him to catch fire at some point and catch up to those expected marks. And I still think it's going to happen at some point over the final 3 months here. So that's Christopher Morel. The other player I considered highlighting is lower end than that, and it's a similar case to Christopher Morel, and it's Trevor Larnach of the Twins, who first 3 years had a strikeout rate over 30%. It was awful. It's hard to succeed with a strikeout rate that high. It's down to 18% this year, other end of the spectrum. And while Christopher Morel has lost a little bit of exit velocity with his improved contact, Trevor Larnach hasn't lost any. He's always hit the ball hard. This year, average exit velocity is 90th percentile. Max exit velocity is 89th percentile. You want good expected stats. They're both the XBA and X slug are better than 90th percentile too for Trevor Larnach. 291 with a 511 slug is what StatCast says he should have. His actual marks 256 batting average with 440 slugs. So he's underperforming them quite a bit. But with the quality of contact and the amount of contact Trevor Larnach is making, I can understand why the Twins are giving him every opportunity to seize a job in their outfield before turning to Brooks Lee. They may end up having an opening for Brooks Lee that doesn't require them shifting Willie Castro to the outfield. But right now, I can understand why Larnach is standing in Brooks Lee's way with the way those numbers look. Sits against left-handers, but that could change if he gets hot enough, if he starts to live up to these expected stats. And Larnach's somebody who's totally off the radar in fantasy now. So I thought it was a good time to highlight the improvements that he appears to have made, even though they're not backed up yet.
Can I get one more?
Yeah, I'll allow it.
All right. Oneil Cruz, is a guy that we've had a lot of expectations for and has not really lived up to them. He's been better over the past couple of months. And what we've seen is strikeout rate has gone from 30% in May. It was like 28% in June. And Oneil Cruz hits the ball so hard and he's such a good athlete that if he can keep it in that 28 to 30% range, I think he's going to be a must-start fantasy option, at least in any categories leagues. Points league, it'll probably be a little more fringy, but that's the one where the floor for his skill set is probably about 30% strikeout rate. If he can get to that and keep it below that, I think he's going to be really good. And I just think we are going to see an Oneil Cruz stretch where he puts up an 1100 OPS for a month. Like that, I just think that's going to happen. The quality of contact.
Time to eat.
121.5 mile per hour max exit velo. That is the hardest hit ball in the majors this season. He still has the hardest hit ball in the StatCast era. 95 mile per hour average exit velocity. 17% barrel rate. There is going to be a stretch where Oneil Cruz just goes absolutely bonkers, and we haven't seen the best of him yet.
I just wonder, can he get to that stretch being this bad against lefties? That is the biggest downfall for me right now, is that against lefties this year, a 111 batting average, 341 OPS, 36% strikeout rate.
I believe that's an improvement over the last month or so.
It's just so bad.
Yeah, no, it's really bad.
He can go on a stretch where he just dominates righties, but it's not like lefties are just going away. I mean, he still plays against them, but he's been so bad against them.
Brooks Lee just got promoted.
Yes, I actually saw that. And again, the timing for this is weird because we'll talk about that more on Thursday's podcast, which will come out.
Put him on my sleeper list.
Before whatever. But we'll talk about it. Don't worry. You'll hear about Brooks Lee before Friday's podcast.
You're not worried about Brooks Lee's exit velocities?
Yeah, Brooks Lee's fine.
Oh. Wow. And he doesn't even have a dad who used to be in the majors. So that's a little weird too. Some second half breakouts for me. Someone I've talked a lot about recently is Jackson Chourio, who had a pretty solid June. I mean, not that the counting stats have been great yet, but a batting average over 300 and 897 OPS in the month, 4 homers, 1 steal. We spoke about this just the other day, Chris and I. The sprint speed is still fantastic for Chourio. So if he's hitting for this batting average and getting on base, I think the steals are going to come. And we've just seen this play out so many times where prospect gets called up, is okay, kind of flounders around the first half, and then the second half comes and just really starts to put everything together. And I can see that happening for Jackson Chourio. Same thing with Wyatt Langford, another name we spoke a lot about recently, hit for the cycle last Sunday and had a solid June as well. 309 batting average, 3 homers, 6 steals, 894 OPS. There's just too much power there for it not to show up at some point. So, while he only hit 3 home runs in June, with the weather heating up and, him kind of tapping in and pulling the ball more, I just see big second halves coming for both of these guys who are just uber talented and not breaking any news there, obviously. And we are recording this before Gavin Williams' debut, but I could see him making a big impact in the second half. He was a big name pitching prospect, one of the top prospects entering 2023, and he pitched well last year, a 3.29 ERA, the whip on the higher side, walks could be a problem, but right around a strikeout per inning, 12% swinging strike rate. There was lots of enthusiasm for him coming into the season, has missed almost the first half with that elbow injury, but he's rehabbed, he's looked all right, he's coming back, and obviously pitching for one of the best teams in baseball. So some pretty obvious candidates, I think, here, but anything you guys would like to add? Langford, Chourio, Gavin Williams, second half breakouts.
No, I mean, I think if you're just going to gamble on pedigree, that's kind of a tried and true method for picking out breakouts. So if for no other reason, and obviously we've seen some signs of improvement from Langford and Chourio here recently that adds to the optimism you may have for them. And I do want to kind of reiterate something Chris was saying earlier about maybe the obvious cases. So much of my mental energy and bandwidth this season has been devoted to explaining why underachieving stud hitters are going to bounce back. And just because we're not talking about them here doesn't mean I don't think they're going to bounce back. Chris mentioned Julio Rodriguez and Fernando Tatis, both of which I'd agree with, except I don't know, given the nature of Tatis's injury, when we're going to see him again. Might not be till September, if at all. It might be in July.
Yeah, it might be 2 weeks. It might be 2 months.
Yeah. But also Austin Riley, Matt Olson to a lesser extent. Basically any stud hitter, any hitter who was drafted as a stud and is still underperforming given the way the offensive environment across the league this year. I still expect to have better numbers in the second half. I'd even say that for Corbin Carroll, who has perhaps been the most concerning.
Well,
kind of a catch-all take for all of them there.
And to color that a little bit, right before we went on the air, I did a little bit of research looking at there's been a lot of discussion of is there any precedent for what Corbin Carroll's done this season, going from a superstar to an also-ran this year. And so I decided to look up the biggest drops from one year to the next in WOBA over the past 30 seasons. He actually only has the 15th biggest, which I found kind of surprising. I mean, it's out of 500 qualifying seasons. So that's still really bad. But one thing that was heartening was, you look at the list of the biggest drops from one year to the next, the following year for 6 of the 15 biggest were also among the 15 biggest risers, which is just to say that there can be explanations for why players are going wrong. We talked about Julio Rodriguez on Wednesday's podcast, and what all of his power has been to the center field and right and left center, none to the pull side this season. There can be explanations for why a player is struggling. And also you should still believe that these elite players are going to figure it out, is the best way to put it, and become elite players again. I'm more skeptical about Corbin Carroll because we saw it start in the second half of last season, but I still think certainly Corbin Carroll is going to have a better second half than his first half. I feel pretty confident in that.
Well, it's hard for him to get worse, I guess.
Yeah.
But hopefully it does happen. It's just such a weird situation, and we've speculated on the shoulder, but the fact that we haven't heard anything about it and
hasn't missed any time.
I think as of this recording, Corbin Carroll's actually outscored Matt Olson in points leagues, which was another thing I was surprised to see.
Yeah, that's pretty surprising.
Yep. All right, let's slide over to the bust. Always tougher to figure out which players. I mean, look, there's obvious candidates we can talk about, FIP minus XFIP and FIP minus ERA, and, expected numbers and the obvious candidates there. But Scott, who are some names for you that could take a step back here in the second half?
Well, I really tried for this podcast to to pick out players that we haven't talked about a bunch, but I'm going to get the most obvious out of the way here real quickly. Tyler Anderson, who maybe already started his descent into disaster with his last 2 starts. He has been like a huge overachiever by all measures all season long. I believe he has the second biggest gap between his ERA and his expected ERA and his ERA and his FIP. The second biggest for both of those, Tyler Anderson. So, but any way you want to measure what ERA should be, Tyler Anderson is overachieving. And I think it's going to be a true bust scenario where for people who still have him, it's going to be like, I can't get this guy off my roster fast enough. Because you could point to like Ranger Suarez and Seth Lugo. A lot of the pitchers that we've been talking about all season long are overachieving, but I don't think either of them are going to reach a point where it's like, I don't want them on my roster anymore. Tyler Anderson absolutely will if he isn't already there. So that's the obvious one. I'm going to double down on Jurickson Profar coming back down to earth too. He's kept it going longer than I imagined. I finally had to concede to moving him into the top 25 in my outfield rankings, but I still don't really believe in it, given his 11-year track record of being just the epitome of mediocrity. And for the most part, a lot of the underlying numbers look the same, except for the obvious, okay, he's hitting the ball a little harder on average. The barrel rate is higher. But it's not like there's been this extensive change in the underlying numbers that would make it obvious, okay, Jurickson Profar are clearly a better player now. And it may have already started for him, too, because since June 1st, he's batting .271 with a 777 OPS, only 3 home runs. Not terrible numbers. Again, not like, oh, I got to drop this player.
Still useful, yeah.
But kind of trending down, and I think it's only going to get worse for Jurickson Profar.
Yeah, I thought about Jurickson Profar too. I mean, the fact that he makes as much contact as he does, he is hitting the ball a lot harder this year. It's just outfield has been a pretty bad position. I think it is more likely than not he does take a bit of a step back, maybe still useful, but not the superstar. Oh gosh, superstar that we saw in the first half with Jurickson Profar.
Right.
Chris.
But I want to go further and say I think he could get to the point where he's not even useful. Because yes, he is hitting the ball harder on average, but what happens if he stops hitting the ball harder on average? That doesn't mean just because he's done it to this point doesn't mean that's like a sticky skill that he's developed.
Yeah, sometimes guys are just hot.
Yeah. Chris, over to you. Second half bust.
I think there is one even more obvious case than Tyler Anderson. And that is the guy so Tyler Anderson is outperforming his expected ERA by 1.75 runs, which is a massive number. It is also nearly 3/4 of a run lower in gap between his xERA and his actual ERA than Reynaldo Lopez's, who has a 1.83 ERA, seems all but certain to make the All-Star game. That's great. There is certainly no track record of a Braves starting pitcher making the All-Star game with like a sub 2-ish ERA over the past, let's say, year, and then completely falling apart in the second half. That's never happened. I don't know.
Except it did happen with Bryce Elder. I don't know that the audience understood.
Bryce Elder is who I was referring to last year. Now, look, they are different pitchers, right? Reynaldo Lopez, many more strikeouts. His strikeout rate is up to 26%. The thing there is I just don't buy that he's a 26% strikeout rate guy. His slider whiff rate is 45%. It was 38% last year. His changeup 41%. It was 33% last year. I don't really think that either of those are going to be sustainable. So I think the strikeout rate is going to come down. Walk rate remains pretty mediocre. Quality of contact. I mean, he went, what was it? Was it Tuesday night? 5 innings, 2 earned runs, despite walking 4. 2 earned runs over 4 1/3 innings. Even that is like, how did he get away with that? He walked 4. The quality of contact metrics weren't good. He's getting outstanding results on balls in play. His expected WOBA on contact is 403. That's actually the second worst mark of his career. Significantly worse than the 369 major league average. I think Reynaldo Lopez is someone who, look, the RP eligibility is great. He is already at a point in innings pitched that he has not been at in 6 seasons since 2019. add it all up, and it just I think there's a very good chance that Reynaldo Lopez is just droppable outside of maybe points leagues because of the RP eligibility, but I could see a point where he's just like Jordan Hicks. He's not going deep enough into games that it doesn't really matter that he's RP eligible anyway. So he's one. And then
I will say real quick, Chris, on Reynaldo Lopez, is there a chance that he just gets moved back to the bullpen at some point?
I don't. Maybe if I think he would have to struggle a lot, right? Like he's a veteran. They're
I just
not.
worry about the innings.
Yeah, I would think so. Well, they've been so careful with his
Mhm.
innings. Only once this year has he started on regular rest.
Yeah,
That's
his
gonna
next
happen
start is going to be the second time.
and I think you mentioned, Chris, there have been a lot of 5-inning starts lately. So I think they've been kind of managing the workload all season. I don't think that's what would push him back to the bullpen as effective as he's been. But if he struggles and, Ian Anderson comes back in the second half and looks like the Ian Anderson of old and Schwellenbach takes a step forward, it's not outside the realm of possibility. I think the odds are pretty low that Lopez goes back to the bullpen, but it's worth mentioning.
And then I want to point just another guy who I think we all generally believe in as a very good pitcher, but I think there are some warning signs in the profile, and that's Tanner Houck, who has had an excellent first half, although he has certainly slowed down as well. It was a tough June, 4.85 ERA. It was mostly the last start, but he's another guy who's outperforming his expected stats by quite a bit. The strikeout rate is up, but it's not great at 24%. The biggest change for Tanner Houck has the walk rate has gone from 9% to 4.3%. Maybe that'll sustain, but he's lost a lot of whiffs on most of his pitches. The whiff rate is down. I think he's probably more like a mid to high 3s ERA guy than what we've seen so far. And that should still make Tanner Houck a very, very valuable pitcher to have, but I don't think he's the difference maker he's looked through most of the first 3 months.
And I think that's a good. Go ahead, Scott.
I feel like he's kind of been Walmart Ranger Suarez this year, where both they're basically the same pitcher, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they're
24% strikeout rates. Yeah,
but in terms of ground balls and walks and the improvements they've made this year, he hasn't gotten nearly as much attention as Ranger Suarez, but he's been about as dominant, and maybe will regress to this about the same point too.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a fair transition for my second half bust, and check the bias at the door. This one hurts me to say. Shota Imanaga. And I think this is relative to expectations too, because I still think he could pitch to a mid to high 3s ERA, but I think that might leave people disappointed just based on what he's done for most of the first half of the season. The weather is heating up. The ball is flying out. He's a fly ball pitcher. He does give up barrels. Teams are going to start to see him a second time. And not just because this happened already once, but the only time a team has seen him a second time was the Mets start, where he got absolutely destroyed. I'm not saying that's going to happen every time he faces a team for a second time, but the fact that, all right, they maybe start to figure something out with that deceptive fastball or the splitter. Does he have a third pitch that he can rely on that he can go to consistently? So as much as I love Imanaga, and I think he'll be a serviceable pitcher, I could just see the numbers kind of regressing and taking a step back in the second half. And maybe that will kind of catch some people by surprise.
Yeah, I think it's a good call. I didn't think of it, but I think the more, as always goes for bust picks, I think the more likely scenario is that he doesn't bust. But it's certainly plausible that it goes the way you laid out.
All right, let's take our final break. And when we return, we'll hit some of your mailbag questions right after this.
An unsub, a seasoned one.
And he's leaving a calling card.
How do we find a ghost? I have a plan.
Welcome back in. Let's talk some mailbag questions. And this one is from Josh. You highlighted Bryce Terang on your July 1st pod, so I thought I would take a look. Brendan Donovan has had a solid season through the end of June, and all of the metrics predict that he will improve rest of season. Bryce Terang has played better than Donovan so far through the end of June slightly, but all of the numbers show a hefty regression coming. His ground ball rate is greater than 50%, and his BABIP is 338. Barrel rate, 3.3%. Hard hit rate, 33% are terrible. Sounds like luck to me.
Nowhere in this email did you mention stolen bases. That's the problem. Terang is one of the very best at it. Donovan basically doesn't do it. So yeah, that's the distinction. The hitting stuff is secondary.
And I will say, like, Donovan does have better quality of contact metrics than Bryce Terang, but it's not like he's significantly underperforming them. He has a 338 expected WOBA, a 332 actual WOBA. He has a 275 expected batting average, a 270 actual batting average. So I kind of think when you look at Brendan Donovan, it's reasonable to think that Bryce Terang has had the best 3 months of his season. I would probably agree with that. I don't think he's what's he up to? 280? 287 batting average. Like, I don't think that's likely to be the case moving forward, but I don't really see a big breakout coming for Brendan Donovan. I kind of think he is what he is, and what he is maybe a slightly above average hitter overall. Terang, you bring up like a 50% ground ball rate and the low hard hit rate and all that stuff is like,
ground balls are good for him.
Like, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. That's part of the reason his batting average has improved, because he's put the ball on the ground more than last year.
Yeah.
You don't want him to be Willie Mays Hayes from Major League 2.
Yeah, I think, like, if he hits 270 the rest of the way, 265, 270, but he still steals 20 more bases, I don't think, at least in roto leagues, there's any question that you'd rather have Bryce Terang than Brendan Donovan. In a points league, okay, I could see maybe Brendan Donovan being a little better, but on the whole, I'm not moved to trade out Bryce Terang for Brendan Donovan, even in a points league.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up too. Last 28 days, Brendan Donovan's batting 347, a 908 OPS. He's averaging 3.2 fantasy points per game. Bryce Terang only hitting 272, a 758 OPS. He's still averaging more fantasy points per game over the last 28 days. Because he leads off, he gets so many plate appearances, and he steals so many bases.
This gets lost when we talk about stolen base specialists and points leagues. Like, for a long time, Trey Turner was clearly still a first round caliber, maybe early second round caliber points league player. And he would always fall longer than he should just because, well, it's not his format, but it's like, yeah, but you still get points for stolen bases. You get 2 of them, actually. Yeah. So that I think it would be reasonable to think Brendan Donovan could be better than Bryce Terang moving forward, but I think on the whole, it's a pretty unexciting fantasy profile.
All right, this next one's from Russ. Grade the trade in a 14-team head-to-head categories, standard 5x5, keeper league where you keep 5 players each year. Traded away Michael Harris, Manny Machado, and Zach Gallen. Received Jose Ramirez and Walker Buehler.
So at this point, you're not keeping Walker Buehler. You might not keep Manny Machado either, but there's no way in a 5-keeper 14-team league right now that you're even considering Walker Buehler.
Yeah,
he's not a top 10 round pick if we were redrafting right now, right?
No.
And Machado might not be a top 70 player. I think that's probably around where I have him in my overall rankings. So if you're looking just at the keeper value, it's Ramirez for Harris and Gallen. I think on the whole, it's a fine trade. I think I'd rather just have the best player in Jose Ramirez, especially with
clearly the best player.
Harris. Yeah, he's by far, especially with Harris injured. Although even if Harris was healthy,
I'm not sure. I'm kind of tired of doing the let's overrate Michael Harris again thing for fantasy. So yeah, I mean, it is 14 teams, which is a deeper league, but only 5 keepers. So you want the most impactful keepers you can get. Do you lose something in the short term? He doesn't say he's out of it, does he?
Mm-hmm.
No.
I'm not
sure you
do.
lose something.
I mean, Harris is hurt right now. You may lose a little in the short term. It depends what your alternatives are. Given that it's a 14-team league, they might not be great. Even so, I'm going to give this trade a B+.
What if the trade was just Machado and Gallen for Jose Ramirez, the healthy players?
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
That's even better. That's probably an A. I'm gonna give this an A-. Your scenario, it's an A.
All right, this one's from Sander. I am in a shallow 8-team mixed league and need help with home runs and RBI. My currently rostered first basemen are Paul Goldschmidt and Vinny P. The available free agents include Jamer Candelario, Ryan Mountcastle, Andrew Vaughn, Jake Cronenworth. So my question is, should I add one of those free agents? If so, who? Or stick it out with Goldschmidt and Vinny P?
I mean, what makes these extremely shallow leagues so tricky is that the whole mid-range is leveled out. You know, like basically Vinny Pasquantino has no practical value in a league this shallow, because on a week-to-week basis, because especially since it's a head-to-head league, right? On a week-to-week basis, how confidently can you say, oh, he's going to outperform Jeimer Candelario, especially given how hot Candelario has been over the past 6 weeks or so? So I don't think you should be afraid to drop Vinny Pasquantino. Rest of season, I think Pasquantino is the most valuable of these players. But you kind of just, when you're talking about the mid-tiers like that, you can be, in a real shallow league like this, you can be as aggressive as you want to be and swapping one player out for another based on matchups or schedule, yeah, or hotness, streakiness.
Yeah. I've got them Goldschmidt, Pasquantino, and Cronenworth 14 through 16. So it's like flip a coin, you know?
Yeah. I think the only way you're going to substantively improve your roster in a way that you don't have to be so hyperactive as a manager is to find a way to package 2 non-studs for a stud. The shallower the league, you just want to get as many studs that you'd never think of sitting as possible. That's really the only strategy.
This next one's from Nick. Many thanks for the fascinating June 26th discussion on ERA and its general lack of predictability of pitching performance going forward. Please keep talking about ways to get a handle on pitching performance. 2 thoughts in this respect. Though good pitching translates across formats, it may be worthwhile to distinguish between points and roto scoring. Would it be more accurate to say, for example, that innings pitched per outing has more predictive value in points leagues? And with that, innings pitched correlates with pitching efficiency as measured by number of pitches per out registered. Again, more relative to point scoring, but also has utility in roto.
Well, efficiency is normally the word I use for roto leagues, for categories leagues. Well, volume is normally just if you're just fixating on one concept, volume for points leagues, efficiency for roto leagues. So it is kind of weird to bring efficiency into the points league discussion, but I understand what you're saying. I don't know to what extent it's true that innings pitched correlates with pitching efficiency as measured by number of pitches per out registered. You'd think it would be true, but a lot of times starts are limited more just because the guy's young and the team is looking to limit his innings, or they don't trust him to face a lineup the 3rd time. So there probably is some correlation there, but I'm not sure it's as clear as you think. I honestly haven't looked into it.
Well, I think the thing that is worth talking about here is that these things are all related, right? Like Seth Lugo is going to throw a lot of pitches, and he's going to pitch deep into games regardless of how well he's pitching, because he's just got that kind of arm, and the Royals clearly trust him. But I think you look at Reynaldo Lopez, who we talked about earlier. His first 12 starts of the season, he averaged 5 2/3 innings per start. He had 69 innings and 12 starts. That's, in this environment, that's really good. The problem is he was only throwing 85 pitches per start. He wasn't actually like pitching. He was pitching deep into games, but it wasn't because this guy is built to, he's a horse and he can go. It's because he was getting a 264 BABIP and a 203 batting average against, and a 160. Like, when you pitch better, you pitch deeper into games. This is something we've talked about a lot over the years with Blake Snell, who can pitch deep into games in those stretches where he's pitching really well and getting great results. My cats are fighting behind me. I'm sorry. But when things go poorly, like if Reynaldo Lopez is a 4 ERA pitcher, he's probably going to average 5 innings per start, and nothing else will have changed except he's just not getting outs as efficiently. And so these are some pitchers certainly have the ability to pitch deeper into games. Sandy Alcantara, Seth Lugo, that's true, but that is going to be correlated to the results that they're getting. And that is still tied to the impossible or near impossible to predict nature of pitching. So I don't know if there's a ton of value to be derived from trying to, this guy's a little more efficient, because that's inherently tied to the results that they're getting, which we know are highly unpredictable.
This last question is from Angel. 12-team head-to-head categories league on Yahoo. 4 keepers, minimum 1 pitcher and 1 hitter. I drafted Paul Skeens in the 20th round. I do not care about the keepers that much since I won't be returning to the league next year.
Oh,
Wow, that's a little messed up. Trade Paul Skeens and Corbin Carroll for Sonny Gray and Rafi Devers.
No, I have Devers ranked ahead of Carroll, and I have Skeens ranked ahead of Gray. So I think you're giving up the worst player in both sides of this deal.
wait, no, he's not.
No, yeah, he gives up Skeens and Carroll. He
Oh,
gives
sorry.
Gray and
Okay,
Devers.
yeah.
He's getting the better hitter, according to your rankings. He's getting the worst pitcher. The better hitter in Devers, the worst pitcher in Skeens.
I don't know if this is a big enough upgrade to do it. I mean, it could look going from Carroll to Devers if you're covered in speed and you're really just looking for batting average and power at this point. That is a pretty big upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to consider that he won't be returning to the league next year, because I just don't think that's right. I played in a keeper league with a prominent baseball writer who I won't name, who
Name and shame, baby.
Traded away all his long-term assets and won the league and then dropped out of the league. And I just thought it just didn't sit well with me.
It was Wayne Huizinga. It's a little dated reference. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It just didn't sit right with me. I've never been able to think of that guy the same way again. But yeah, I don't think it's a good enough deal to justify the keeper loss here. Which I think is the more. I think it's better for the audience to approach the question that way too, because rarely are people looking at a trade from the perspective of, oh, I'm not going to be in the league next year. I think the fact that Skeens is keepable in round 20 or whatever, to whatever degree that helps you this year, to get Devers and Gray instead of Skeens and Carroll, I don't think it's worth pursuing, because I'm not even confident it helps you this year.
It's pretty fair by my trade values chart, but that's with admittedly what I think is probably an overly generous valuation of Corbin Carroll. So I think in a vacuum, you're probably getting a better player. You're probably getting a better package. But if if Carroll bounces back in the second half, we all think he's more valuable at his best than Rafael Devers. So I think it's risky even without getting into the keeper aspect. But once you consider the keeper aspect, it's probably not worth doing.
And even if you are leaving the league, you still have to think about the implications moving forward for the next year. This person that's getting Paul Skeens, even though you don't care you're leaving the league, that is maybe one of the best keepers in the league. Paul Skeens in the 20th round. That changes things for everyone else. So.
Yeah, I mean, even if you want to think of it from the selfish, who cares what happens to the other guy next year scenario, it's like you should be able to get more for a Skeens with a 20th round keeper cost.
Right.
Yeah, that's also fair.
Yeah, I agree with that. We are going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.